thousands of tanks from Egypt, Jordan, Syria surrounded the Israelis.
After only 6 days, the war is over. Israel now controls 3.5 times as much land as it had 6 days ago.
The days when the Jewish people remained passive in the face of genocidal enemies, those days are over.
In under 70 years, in establishing what's the most formidable, powerful militaries in the world. And
Ynet has reported Tel Aviv is the world's #2 city for tech startups, behind only Silicon Valley in the United States.
हम दो देशों के बीच फुल डिप्लोमेटिक रिलेशंस को भले 25 साल हुए हो, लेकिन सच्चाई यही है कि भारत और इजराइल कई 100 साल से बहुत गहराई से जुड़े हुए हैं।
Hi everybody, Israel is one of the most powerful countries in the world. And what's absolutely mind-blowing about this country is that Israel has fought 6 wars, 2 intifadas, a continuing terrorism threat, an economic boycott and a diplomatic isolation from almost all of its neighboring countries. In fact, for the first 5 decades, they were averaging at 1 major war per decade. Now, for a country that is so fiercely engaged in war, Israel is not even a big country. They are smaller than our state of Kerala, have a population that is less than half of Mumbai, and they don't have any natural resource to bank on, including water. But even then, today they are called as the startup nation with a GDP of $480 billion. They are the 10th largest weapons exporter in the world, and most importantly, it is literally the 8th most powerful country in the world, even ahead of oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia and UAE. The question is, in spite of not having any natural resource, without vast lands or population, with such a hostile environment around the borders, how did Israel become such a developed and rich nation? How did they become such a powerful country in terms of military and geopolitical power? How did Israel become a startup hub in spite of being at the epicenter of war? And most importantly, as Indians, what are the lessons that we need to learn from the incredible rise of Israel? This video is brought to you by Kuku FM, but more on this at the end of the video. This is a story that dates way back to 14th of May 1948, when Israel had just declared independence. And the very next day itself, they were attacked by not 1, not 2, but 5 different countries simultaneously. And these armies came from Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq and Lebanon. And Israel was not just outnumbered, but even outgunned, because all they had were a few planes and weapons sent by Stalin. So obviously, everyone expected the Arabs to win. But you know what, guys? The entire world was shocked to see that suddenly these Arabs withdrew from their positions from all directions, including the Golan Heights, Jerusalem and even Gaza Strip. And the Israelis did not just defeat all these armies, but even capture the western part of Jerusalem, the eastern part of Gaza and the northern part of Acre. The question is, in spite of having such a large army, in spite of having so many more weapons than Israel, why did these Arab soldiers withdraw? Well, as it turns out, the Israelis had one attribute that the Arabs did not have, which was a psychological strategy. Yes, you heard that right. In the middle of the war, the Israelis actually ran out of bombs and artillery. And this is when one of the soldiers actually came up with the idea of using seltzer bottles. For those who don't know, seltzer bottles are nothing but glass bottles that were used to store sodas. And when these bottles were dropped from high altitudes, they made the same whistling sounds like a bomb being dropped. And they made a loud noise when they burst. The best part was that they were very cheap, easy to acquire and were available in abundance. So you know what? The Israelis gathered as many seltzer bottles as they could, loaded them in a crop duster plane and dropped them on the nearby Arab areas. And these bottle drops made so much noise that the Arabs were convinced that they were being bombed. And since the on-ground soldiers could not face bombs dropping from the sky, they fled from those areas. On top of that, the Israelis used a weird weapon called the Davidka, which again was an unsophisticated weapon that neither had the accuracy nor did it have the capability to cause a lot of damage. But even then, the Israelis used it to drive away the troops from Safed and Golan Heights. The question is, how is that even possible? Well, as it turns out, this weapon made such a loud noise and so thunderous was this noise that most of the Arabs again thought that Israelis were using a secret deadly weapon, and some even thought that they had an atomic bomb. And because the Arabs were very bad with coordination, none of the army units could actually figure out what the hell were these Israelis doing. So again, most of the Arab citizens started evacuating the villages, and seeing the villages evacuate, even the Arab soldiers started fleeing the territories. These, combined with other clever techniques, resulted in the state of Israel controlling not only the Jewish state, but also 60% of the area proposed for the Arab state. Similarly, in 1967, when they got attacked by Egypt, Iran, Syria and Jordan, they had collected such accurate intelligence that even before the Egyptian Air Force could take off, while the pilots were having breakfast, Israelis bombed their airports, paralyzing the army, because of which they could take control of most of the Sinai Peninsula. And on top of this military intelligence, we have the legendary Mossad team. And one of the classic Mossad stories is that of a legendary spy named Eli Cohen, who was sent by Israel into Syria as a rich businessman who was willing to fund the Syrian power. He hosted lavish parties, funded the rising Syrian party, and got so close with the Syrian leadership that they allowed him to visit the Syrian outposts and reportedly even offered him the position of the Deputy Defense Minister of Syria itself. Now, do you realize how crazy this is? So he did not just gather intel, but even offered to help the Syrians by planting eucalyptus trees at the outposts so that the soldiers could escape the scorching heat of the sun. And because of these trees and Eli's intel, the Israelis were able to accurately guess the locations of the Syrian outposts. So when the Six-Day War happened in 1967, the Israelis were easily able to attack the Syrians by using these trees as reference points for their locations. Similarly, it is said that one of Mossad's spies named Ashraf Marwan was the son-in-law to Egypt's president Gamal Nasser himself. And as a result of this extensive and sharp spy network, Israel was able to collect so much intel that even before the enemy attacked Israel, they were already in control of the war. This is how, through military hacks and intelligence, Israel was able to keep the Arabs out of their territory without causing any damage to their own lands. Now the question over here is, this is all just defense, right? And wars are super costly, isn't it? So how did Israel manage to grow its economy amidst all these wars? Well, for starters, the Israelis did have significant financial help. Number one, because of the Holocaust, the Jewish societies from all across the world funded Israel and raised money for them, including interest-free loans and aid. This number was around 65 million pounds. Secondly, they got $850 million over a period of 14 years from 1953 to 1966 from West Germany as reparations for the Holocaust. And thirdly, from 1949 to 1973, they received an average $122 million a year as economic aid from the US. But what made them special and powerful is not this money, but the strategies that they deployed with this money to establish a powerful geopolitical position in the world. The question is, what exactly were these strategies? Well, the root cause of it lies in the education system of Israel, which is very, very different from India. And this is where you'll realize what an absolute failure our education system is. You know guys, we produced more engineers in the past 15 years than the entire population of Israel. And yet, the quality of our engineers is so bad that today Indian engineers are recruited like commodities by mass recruiters. And it's not because these companies are bad, but because our engineers, including myself, do not have a competent engineering skill to add value to the market. The question is, why? Well, as it turns out, while our engineering students are made to design engineering projects just for the sake of marks and submission, in Israel, because they cannot afford to have unskilled talent, they strictly evaluate the projects on the basis of the industry-specific problem that their project solves. For example, while most of our students make copy-pasted engineering projects with fancy names like artificial intelligence and data science that never really solves a problem in the industry, the Israeli students actually take up real-world problems like water scarcity, irrigation, traffic management, defense challenges, and even medical problems. While our engineering students are taught about irrelevant technologies that have already gone outdated a decade back, the Israeli syllabus is changed periodically to suit the specific requirement of not just the domestic market, but even the international market. Because for them, every penny invested into the education needs to pay dividends to the economy or to the intellectual powerhouse of the country. And the result? Well, in the 1960s, while the country was suffering due to water shortage, one of the engineers named Simcha Blas invented the iconic drip irrigation, because of which a farm's water consumption could be reduced by 60% and the crop yield could be increased by 90%. So today, his company Netafim is a global powerhouse with more than 30% share of the global drip irrigation market and sells its products in 110 countries including India. And that is some incredible soft power. Similarly, once an Israeli scientist was fed up with chronic stomach pain, so he ended up creating a digestible disposable camera that is now being used all across the world to diagnose infection, intestinal disorders and cancers in the digestive system. It is a medical marvel because of which today we are able to access those areas of the digestive system that were completely out of range during that time. To top it all off, since the Israelis constantly had rockets fired at them, Israel along with the US developed a technology called the Iron Dome, which is by far the most sophisticated air defense system in the world. And the beauty of this tech is that it can shoot down 1,000 moving rockets mid-air with a 90% interception rate. And this is what it looks like. And today, Israel has 300 R&D centers with Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google and Intel. All of these companies looking for only one thing, and that is to extract the best out of the world-class talent of the Israelis. On top of that, in the 1990s, the Israeli government realized that because of the wars and hostile border conditions, very few foreign companies were willing to invest in Israel. So while Israelis were great at developing technologies, they did not know how to market and scale their companies because the market in Israel itself was too small. As in, let's say you developed a warehouse management system for an e-commerce company in India that can manage 1 lakh warehouses together or 100,000 warehouses together. So you will definitely find a place in the market with a giant company like Reliance or DMart. But the population of Israel itself was so small that this warehouse management product for 100,000 warehouses could not find a market in Israel. So you know what? The government of Israel came out with a game-changing policy that changed the face of Israeli economy forever. This initiative was called the Usma Fund, which was a government venture capital fund. In this policy, they invited international investors with the condition that the government itself would invest 40% of the funding provided the foreign companies invest the rest 60% in the Israeli startups. For example, if a company invested $6 million in a new Israeli technology company, the government would pay the remaining $4 million. And besides investing, the government also gave the investors the option to cheaply buy back the stake from them in 5 years. Basically, the government of Israel would take the risk of investing and selling their stake, by which all the profits can be taken up by either the existing investor or the new investor. Now, do you realize what a sweet deal this is? It's like the Indian government itself investing in Ola and asking SoftBank to join hands with it. And after 5 years, when Ola becomes a big settled company, SoftBank itself can buy the stake from the Indian government. So not so surprisingly, investors from all around the world flock to invest in these early stage Israeli startups. And in total, the Usma funds raised $263 million for 164 startups with $100 million coming from the government capital. And you know what? Today, they are worth more than $3 billion. And once these venture capital firms saw value in these startups, just like we experienced a funding rush in 2021, Israel witnessed a boom in startup funding way back in the 1990s itself. And fast forward to 2022, today Israel has become as significant, if not more significant than the Silicon Valley itself. So now, Israelis build great tech and sell it to the American companies, bringing in a huge amount of wealth for the country. And some of these startups are Mobileye, which created systems of self-driving cars, got sold to Intel for $15.3 billion. M Systems, the USB drive company, got acquired by SanDisk for $1.6 billion. Waze, that created real-time traffic updates on the maps, got acquired by Google for $1.3 billion. And similarly, there were million and billion dollar deals made across domains in food, gaming, medical, and cybersecurity. This is the reason why today Israel is known as the startup nation with more than 6,000 startups and has a per capita venture capital that is 28 times more than the United States itself. And some of these startups even ended up laying the foundations for Israel's geopolitical power. The question is, what is the relationship between Israeli startups and Israel's geopolitical power? Well, as it turns out, these startups also ended up building the defense industry of Israel. And long story short, Israelis realized that if they keep on spending 30% of their GDP into war and keep on buying foreign weapons, they cannot grow their economy. So they built an in-house weapons industry that could not just build weapons for Israel, but also for the global markets. And all thanks to their industry-specific education and R&D investment. Just like the Iron Dome, Israel makes some of the most powerful weapons in the world. So now, their military spending has turned into an investment by which they made $11 billion merely through arms exports. By the way, along with the arms, Israel also provides cybersecurity and intelligence to various countries across the world. This, combined with the military intelligence and mandatory military service policy, the Israeli army stands as one of the most powerful armies in the world. Along with that, Israel also helped a lot of other nations when they were falling weak. For example, before 9/11, Mossad informed the US about a major attack in 2001. They supported India during the Indo-China War. They trained a special protection group, trained the army of Singapore when no one was willing to help them. And each one of these favors adds to the geopolitical influence of Israel. So because of this unparalleled strength that they have developed, the United States provides billions of dollars worth of aid to Israel so that they could keep a check on the Arab states and the Suez Canal. This is how, through Jugaad, intelligence, education, incubation and engineering, Israel has emerged as a powerful progressive nation in spite of all odds. And this brings me to the last part of the episode, which are the lessons that India needs to learn from the incredible rise of Israel. Meanwhile, if you are someone who wants to know more about this brilliant country in your own regional language, you can check out audio shows of the creation of Israel and the Israel-Palestine war on Kuku FM app. Kuku FM is India's leading audio learning platform with over 4.5 plus rating and 1,000 plus non-fiction audiobooks in multiple regional languages across India. My favorite books in this platform are Start With Why by Simon Sinek for business and The Art of War for geopolitics. So if these kind of subjects intrigue you, go download the Kuku FM app from the link in the description. Moving on to the lessons, the first thing we need to learn from Israel is that in the world of geopolitics, you first have to stand by yourself before you expect others to stand by your side. In this case, the Jewish society, the Israeli army and Mossad laid such a solid foundation for Israel that the United States itself started funding Israel. Lesson number 2. Human capital, if utilized well, is a blessing in disguise, and if not utilized well, it will become a pain in the neck. While our education system is producing educated clerks in bulk, the Israelis invested into their talent and turned themselves into an intellectual powerhouse. And just like today we sing past glories of India being a Sone ki chidiya, if we don't work our ass off, 20 years later we would still be lingering in the past saying, once we had the youngest, biggest workforce in the world. And last and most importantly, while in India we often settle for mediocrity with the fear of failure, there in Israel, in spite of having a hostile border, in spite of fighting 6 wars, in spite of having lack of resources, the Israeli government had the audacity to bet on its own startups so that they could fail early but eventually go on to lead the tech revolution of the world itself. Because the Israeli culture believes in sweating in peace so that you don't bleed in war. That's all from my side for today, guys. Please have a look at all the study materials in the description. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to make YouTube happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.